owner. And I remember talking with friends who came from China. They said, yeah, we were told that everybody owns everything, but we discovered that nobody owns anything. You see?
And that's today, right now. People have right now, people are living in a balloon. Their mortgages, their interest. As a matter of fact, they, especially those who's on those adjustable rate. I mean, right now they're talking about the big housing boom bubble that's getting ready to bust.
Exactly. And you see, if you look at things globally, here's what's happening with the U.S. and why you have outsourcing. It's a simple thing. When I worked for Western Union, my first job. This was in '46, and they paid 25 cents an hour was the minimum wage. Okay.
Oh, that goes way back.
Now, you know, it would not matter if the minimum wage was 25 cents an hour if you owned all the technology that was, or you accumulated ownership, equity in all the industries that were built from 1946 on. You'd be able to get dividend checks because what's producing the wealth? Human beings are no different. There's no scientific basis for saying that human beings have evolved. Our tools have evolved. You see, once we've had Homo sapiens, Homo sapiens are Homo sapiens, and yes, you can improve by training and education up to a point, but even that is nothing if you take away the tools. If suddenly all the tools and all the structures that have been developed and the infrastructure were eliminated, they suddenly vanished, we'd be starving. Billions of people on Earth would be starving. Why? Because we couldn't produce. We couldn't. If you think of our ability to transport ourselves, we're no longer limited to carrying things on our back or walking. We now have things that can go into space. We can go from a spot on Earth to the moon, and these were thought to be impossible at one time. But now we know that human beings, when they see the challenge, they can if they feel a pressure to change the world, they will. And what's holding it back is the economy. And we're talking about the global economy, and I was starting to say that in the global economy, what hurts the U.S. is that our wage system is more expensive than the wage system in China or Japan.
Or India.
I mean. I can remember I was in Japan back in the 50s during the Korean War, and I had a couple commands, Air Force commands, radar sites. And I was hiring Japanese. You could hire. We needed guards for the installation. And Japanese guards were being paid about 1/7 of what at Japanese currency rates if you had to hire a comparable person in the United States. Well, what happened? At that time, Japan's economy was leveled, and Japan couldn't produce for world trade at that time. Their technology was very primitive, but Japan got smart, and they instituted statistical quality control, and the U.S. said, you can go ahead. If you can sell in the U.S. market, come on in, because the U.S. was afraid that Japan might go communist, so they opened up the trade barriers. So Japan was able to get the most advanced technology. They had cheaper labor and open markets to the United States, and before you know it, Japan was producing better machine tools than the United States, better automobiles than the United States, and it's because they had an advantage in terms of their wage rate.
Okay, now let's look at this as a model for a minute, and look at, for example, I'm looking at within the starting first within Africa, for example, since we're looking at overseas at this moment.
Sure.
Now, when you're looking at all of the natural resources, for example, industries that are not cultivated, that have not been, let me give you an example. For example, the gold mining industry. Let's look at, for example, the solar energy movement in Africa.
Let's take the gold mining, because I happen to have been in South Africa. But
Okay.
And I brought together.
Because before you go there, because I wanted to try to outline to the people to understand that we're talking about how to put together a system where the people can create the capitalization.
Right.
And I think we need to talk more about how to formulate capitalization based upon credit.
Here's what was invented. This is just one tool. Was invented for workers. And you set up a trust. It was called an employee stock ownership plan or trust. They used the trust.
Okay, now repeat that again.
It was an employee stock ownership trust. They call it employee stock ownership plan, but they used a trust, a legal trust.
Now, how do you formulate that trust?
You just put it into the law, and you get it qualified by the Internal Revenue Service, and you also have to report to the Department of Labor.
Okay, now go ahead.
Okay, so you set this up, and the trust borrows on behalf of employees, and it because we straighten out the tax laws, the ideal tax system for employees, you can pay off the loan from on the shares. So what happened is you borrowed.
Okay, now but to pay off on the dividends on the shares of something that don't exist yet.
No,
now hold on, let me explain.
Right.
So you got the trust,
okay,
but now
not a trust.
But
you want to buy the company.
But there you go, the company. Now
Let's
the company has got to be a company that is going to be profitable and that shows a projection through their business plan or whatever.
Absolutely. You have to be well managed. You have to have a business plan that shows that if we make you a $10 million loan, you will be able to pay for it out of the future profits. So that, I'll give you an example of what we did. In 1975, we saved 500 jobs at a company called South Bend Lathe in South Bend, Indiana. It produced a lathe, a machine tool that was considered to be the #1 basic machine tool in the world. Okay, and then it was formed in 1906, and then it got acquired in the 1960s from the family that owned it, and a large conglomerate owned it. And then the Japanese started competing with machine tools. And this was a company that was highly unionized, and the union went out and bargained and got what they thought was a real sweet labor deal. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's the same thing that happened with the civil rights movement.
That's exactly right. The people in charge of the system do things for their own good.
Okay, now go ahead.
Okay, so it was a company called Amstead Industries that owned it. They acquired it. It's a Chicago operation. And so when the steel workers thought that they won, they suddenly started finding people coming into the shop who were looking at all the equipment. They were liquidators. They found out that these were liquidators. And so the company was about 2 months from being liquidated. And Kelso, this was after we began to score on Capitol Hill to get the laws for employee ownership. And so 60 Minutes did a show, and they found out about us. They got in touch with us. And so we looked at the thing, and we said, there's only one way. We think we could save the company. It won't require any pay cuts, but it will require that the money that was going into the old pension plan would have to be used to acquire the company. So that instead of you acquiring in your pension plan shares that come from Wall Street, you'll be acquiring station. You won't lose whatever you had in the past, mm-hmm. but in the future, you're going to be acquiring shares in your own company, okay? And so we were able to borrow, there was one agency, decided to experiment, so they made a loan for $5 million loan at 3% interest. And we picked the interest rate because that's what we want to do in the capital homesteading. We think we can get interest rates down to 3% for worker buyouts of good companies. And it happened to be the company had pretty good management, and the union was willing to work together with them at that time. Later, the thing went sour, but that's for another reason. So we had a government agency putting up $5 million. They wanted to make a grant. I said, no, I don't want a grant. Let's do it in the form of a loan at 3% something. And then banks came in and they provided $4.2 million, and with $9.2 million, that's what it took to buy out the company. Okay? And then you would pay then every year.
Now, let's stop right here. Let's go back 1 second.
Right.
And, okay, we're saying that when you was acquiring a company that was going under liquidation after the unions had put pressure on it.
Right. It was 2 months from liquidation.
Okay. And so now what happened, the employees came up with a plan to be employees owned. Right. And at first that had to be established. An agreement had to be established on that.
They had to develop a viable plan for buying the company, which meant you had to look at the numbers, you had to look at the customer base, you had to see that they would be able to produce enough profits to pay the cost of the capital.
So they're saying, well, we know that we're going to be able to over 10. There's going to be a need of a billion widgets.
Right, exactly.
And we'll have 1 billion widgets already locked down, and we know that this is what this is going to be. That sounds like the same thing with solar energy.
Well, we're looking at any company.
Right, with any company, that's correct.
Any company that has sound management and a good business plan. Keep in mind that the purpose of banks is to buy and sell money. And if they can get their money at 0 interest from the Federal Reserve, they'll add their little markup and a risk, what they call the risk premium, and it's around, at most it's 3%. It'll eventually get less than that, but that's why I picked the number 3%, and it worked. So we saved the company. Now later, the union and management never really got their act together, so that's a problem. So that's why we had to invent to design this so that the workers would have maximum participation. But the national union didn't understand what was going on. They just sat on their hands. I tried to get them to understand what was going on, but they were in the middle of their own political battles, internal battles at that time. But anyway, the important point is that this was the first in history of 100% leveraged buyout.
And Michael Milken.
Right, Milken. I know he was doing leveraged buyout.
Right.
He and I forget the guy he worked with.
Well, see, now let me show you something. Now, this is why I come for the black community, and what I'm talking about, we need new black leadership to address the economic pain of black people. And what I'm looking at on this issue is that we need to learn that when social conditions change, we need to learn. And I'll repeat this. We need to learn to create, when social conditions change, we need to learn to create new forms of economic positioning or economic leveraging.
Right.
And that ties into what you were talking about with the leverage buyout. Now, go ahead.
Okay.
Now that process is something we need. Now, the template is what you're describing.
Oh, yeah, and if you want to look at the legal forms, they're all on our website at cesj.org.
Okay, as a matter of fact, I want to hear what we do here.
In the homepage.
Okay,